Okay, I think we're going to get started. It's a real privilege and honor to have you all with us today. And this is a really important panel about capital campaigns and how to manage them in a time of pandemic and protest and important social change. And the panelists that we have before you today, we have Jim Buggy, who is the former senior warden and capital campaign committee chair of St. Paul's in Fairfield, Connecticut. We have Curtis Farr, who is the rector of St. Paul's Church in Fairfield, Connecticut. We have G. Lee Griffin, the retired chairman and president and CEO of Premier Bancorp, campaign chair at St. James Church, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We have Russ Levenson, who is the rector of St. Martin, Houston. And we have Maurice Seaton, who's principal of Summit Fundraising, New York City, and Laura Meengs-Aikens, managing director of CCS, and she's located in both Chicago and Dallas. Thank you so much for being here today. And we're going to begin by going around and asking the pastors to speak about the different aspects of their campaign briefly. We're going to ask them to identify the goal, the driving mission of their case statement that got people going and got people interested in their campaign. We're going to ask them to speak about where they are in that capital campaign and where that is right now. We're going to ask them to speak about what the greatest challenge has been, whether it's been economic or related to the pandemic and not being able to gather and congregate, whether it's dealing with issues of racial justice or other things. And then we're going to ask them to speak a little bit about what their hopes and what their motivations are behind that capital campaign. And we're going to start with the rector who is furthest along, and that's Russ Levenson.
So thank you, Bill. It's good to be with you all, and I appreciate the opportunity to kind of reflect a little bit. I'm somebody who likes to, I like to raise money. I like to talk to people about being generous. You know, we talk, some of you who are watching will not know, we talked for a little bit before we gathered here with you. And actually, we had three experiences where we had major disruption. So I came to St. Martin's in 2007. We actually had our first capital campaign launched within a year of that time. And if you can think back to 2008, so we launched that campaign, a $25 million campaign in the middle of the financial crisis, and we're successful. It was very hard, but we're able to do that. Move along to right before Harvey, 2017, Hurricane Harvey, and we had spent about a year in conversation with leaders in the parish about a driving vision to meet the changing needs of the church, the changing demographics of the church, the changing worship styles. We had a campus that was in some places almost brand new from a completion that happened in 2006, but in other places was as old as the early 1960s. So we spent a long time trying to land on where we were going to be, and right up to 2017. And two major factors changed the direction of the launch of the campaign. One was the first estimates of the project were extraordinary and kept me up several nights before I came back to the vestry and said, we're just not going to do that. It was almost $100 million, and I couldn't see that happening in my lifetime, or it would have been a very short lifetime after that. And so went back to the vestry and said, we need to try to get this in half, close to half of, can we get what we want for about half? That took a lot of work. So just as we're ready to tee it all up, then Harvey hit Houston and we were underwater, and we completely stopped, and actually used that year to raise a lot of money, over $1 million, for outreach in the community that we doled out to several places and people and churches, et cetera. But once we began to recover from that, we relaunched, and in January of 2018, announced it at the parish meeting, and I would say that the vast majority of the campaign took place in 2018, but I don't think we kind of dotted all the I's and crossed the T's until late, or maybe mid to late 2019, after we had begun building, actually. So we ultimately approved a $55 million expansion, and it included 2 new worship spaces on campus, a contemporary worship space that'll be multi-use, and also a renovation of what was the original church into a smaller chapel, and then using part of that building to create a comprehensive music center. So choir has a place to rehearse, and office, et cetera. And then we tore down all the office buildings that were there and had been there since the 60s, and had built a new expanded office facility, pastoral care center, really. And then on most of the other buildings that were standing, there wasn't a building that wasn't impacted, actually. So we're on about 15 acres. So in the end, we'll have about 250,000 square feet of new or renovated space. Construction got well underway in June of last year, and we'll be through by, we hope to have the keys by Easter. But then comes the pandemic, right? So I will say that we had basically raised the money by then, so 55 in pledges. Still, and we gave people a chance to pay over 3 to 5 years. So we're still expecting pledges to come in. But clearly, the pandemic has changed. I think we're going to circle back to some of those questions later. But I will say, and I think everybody who's involved in this work will agree, the absolute most important part of this kind of work is relationship. And it's relationship between, between the rector and the vestry, but also between the rector, the vestry, and the parish. And you have to have a close relationship to be able to present a vision, to get everybody to buy into the vision, and then to, ask people for every size of gift. And we did a lot of that. And the challenge, of course, in times like this is, keeping that alive and in front of people. Now, it's interesting because the construction really got underway in March of this year, right? So about the time of COVID, we started demolishing buildings, and people didn't come back to our campus, but for a few weeks in June. And they came back and said, where is the XYZ building? Or when did that building get here? It's been fascinating to see people go, so it's really happening. So what will happen is about the time, we reopen, hopefully the vaccine's getting around. When we relaunch next year's program year, lots of people will see their church for the first time in a way they've never seen it before. So.
Wow, thank you so much.
Hey, Russ, how large is your parish?
We've got 9,500 baptized members. So, and when I came, we had just under 8,000. So that was part of the drive. And then adding, contemporary services and different styles of worship. We've been a traditional Rite One church forever, and we still have those services. In fact, our 4 principal services are Rite One, but we now have a Rite Two, and we have a Rite Three, which is really family friendly. We've expanded education, we've expanded outreach, a lot of things on our campus. So all of those were driving factors in moving things up.
Let's turn to Curtis, who's in St. Paul's in Fairfield, Connecticut. And Russ's scale of ministry is always eye-opening, but you have a really important project as well.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me and having us here from St. Paul's. So we began our process at the beginning of 2019, and from the beginning, it was very clear what our theme was going to be and what our real goal in all of this was beyond the fundraising. What people kept saying was that St. Paul's to them is where their hearts are ignited for ministry, basically, where they find passion for engaging the world, and what they call their spiritual home. So heart and home were these words that just kept coming up. And And so as we went through those discernment discussions and built this list of dreams, this list of goals, and then tested them in a feasibility study, we came up with a set of goals that were meant to help us build some capacity for some of the ministries that we are doing and that we are hoping to do. So one project is the renovation, or it's not quite the right word because we're in a historic district, but you know what I mean, kitchen and bathroom updates. And we have a ministry partnership that's forming with a local organization in town, in which we would be feeding folks dinner 3 times a week. And to do that, we really need more refrigeration. We need an updated kitchen. We need bathrooms that can handle that many people. So that was part of our dream. And then just doing some of the basic maintenance stuff of a 165-year-old building, updating or repointing the bricks and repainting the wood, which was somewhat exposed on the outside, and some other projects which included expanding our nursery school, which is a fabulous ministry in town here, supporting lots of neighborhood families as they seek to raise their kids. And so we were over a year into the process, and we were preparing to launch our quiet phase when COVID hit. And immediately the campaign committee agreed that it was time to pause and check in again with the whole parish. So we just sort of put the campaign on the shelf. And like Russ mentioned, you know, this became about relationship, and it always has been. And so our vestry did a wonderful job of reaching out to speak to every one of our parishioners. And we made several calls throughout the last 8 months, several rounds of calls to everyone to check in, specifically focusing on folks who don't have internet access for whatever reason. And so at the end of the summer, we gathered again as a capital campaign committee and reevaluated where we thought the parish was. So we looked at the life circumstances of folks that we had been talking to, and we made the decision that after this 6-month pause, it was time to go again and to continue the process. So we updated our communications a little bit, updated our language to make sure that we were speaking to the current situation. And we began this campaign of communicating, okay, we're getting going again, here we go, everybody ready. And there was almost, at least maybe this is just within me, but there was a sense of healing just from that ability to be forward thinking after so many months of just thinking about, I don't know what tomorrow's gonna look like. I don't know what next week's gonna hold. And I think as we get further into this quiet phase, the more that these conversations are happening, we're finding that sense of excitement again about our future and about the wonderful relationships we have at this parish, and about the ministry we hope to do. And you've mentioned, of course, in addition to COVID, the Black Lives Matter movement, and lots of conversation about protests, and something exciting that our parish has been doing as well is to join a local organization that does social advocacy work, which we can do from home, even if we're not worshiping in person. So it's been in some senses, it's been a great time to be the church, because it's forced us to adapt and to really know what's at the core of our ministry.
Beautiful. Before I turn to Lee to talk from Baton Rouge, I think I should probably open and give Jim Buggy, who is the chair of the Capital Campaign in St. Paul's, to add any views and input.
To echo what Curtis said, I think he did a masterful job, as I'm sure Russ and Bill, you've done the same thing, keeping your congregation engaged, you know, during the time when you're not worshiping in person. We were able to really take advantage of social media. We were able to have services out on our lawn, weather permitting, and that kept the parish close. When we began, as Curtis mentioned, when we began the quiet phase again, we were able to say a couple of things to the parishioners. One was as noted, we've done a couple of projects that were included in the campaign, the repointing of the bricks and the nursery school project. But also, last year we had almost 100% participation and payment of our annual fund.
Wow.
So the parish is in a great financial position, which enabled us to be pretty flexible in talking to people about being creative with pledge payments in the quiet phase. For instance, there are some folks that I've talked to that have lost income over the past few months. They expect that to come back, but because we're in a pretty good situation financially, we were able to say to people, you can balloon payments perhaps in the third or fourth year of your pledge. And that, like for most people who don't do this for a living, people say, can I do that? You know, is it okay to do that? And we're able to afford that opportunity to people. So that gave greater flexibility to campaign. And I should also mention just quickly that we're also doing a dual ask for our annual fund as well as the capital campaign. This is our annual fund season. So we're going through that right now, asking people to at least maintain what they had done in the past. And if they could see themselves to a very small increase in their annual fund pledge, that would be wonderful. But we're talking to people for the first time at St. Paul's about a dual ask. And so far, I think the conversations have been very positive. You know, people understand that, as Curtis mentioned, you know, this is their spiritual home and they want to do the best they can for St. Paul. So I think overall, given the turmoil of the past 6 to 8 months, I think St. Paul's and Fairfield is in a pretty good position.
That's beautiful. And let's turn to Lee.
Well, I should start off by saying that we had what I would call a mini campaign in 2017. We had not had a capital campaign at St. James Episcopal Church for 13 years. And it's a long story there. I don't think I need to go into that in detail, but it was a long time. And as a result, we had a lot of deferred maintenance. So we did a small campaign, went to just a few people in the parish, raised the money that we needed to primarily repoint the brick, to do restoration on our Tiffany windows, and to raise some front end money. Not enough, but the start of a campaign for a new organ. So we have a new rector who's doing a wonderful job, and he had been with us for about 1.5 years. We saw during our the work that we did in 2017 and 18 that we had further deferred maintenance that needed attention. And we also decided that we wanted to make some improvements to the church itself, like a fire depression system in the church. We needed the acoustical system was very poor. We needed electrical wiring redo. We needed heating and air conditioning redo. We had floor problems, and we needed to raise the rest of the money for a new organ. So we set about doing this, organizing ourselves, getting volunteers, getting the cabinet put in place. In late 19 and early 2020, and then of course we know what happened. And Louisiana is, like Russ is very familiar with, is very much impacted by the oil and gas industry. So not only did we have this COVID issue, we had a depression in the energy industry as well. We had a few little hurricanes along the way also. So we decided that the best move for us was to pause. But in the meantime, we had the ability to borrow the money to go ahead and do everything we wanted to do with this new campaign. And the construction will be complete within 30 days. Everything will be completed. We will go for 5 years, 3 to 5 year pledges, and ask our parishioners to pay at least 10% upfront, and then the balance over 1, 2, 3, 4 years. We had done a survey of our parishioners, and that survey looked very good to us. Great majority wanted us to go forward. And so we did, and we feel very confident in what we've done. So here's where we are now. We will start the program, a campaign in January, full speed ahead. And we believe that by doing the construction and doing all the renovations, which we could do during this period of the COVID, and we're going to have to vacate our church anyway, scaffolding all over the place and floors being ripped up and so forth. So it gave us an opportunity to move in and do the construction. We have what we call a Bishop's Hall, which is a large hall that we could do services in accordance with the directions from the diocese. Also, the stock market is improved. As we all know, we took a big hit in the spring, and I don't know how long it's going to last with where it is right now, but it's encouraging. And we have a vaccine breakthrough that we feel and hope like in a few months will be a reality. So we feel confident now to go forward. So we will start in January and let it be a 2 or 3 month campaign, and pray for success.
And just to say, Lee, you took out a loan ahead of time to do to do this deferred maintenance and to work on it while the church has been effectively limited in terms of the people that can go there. And that's an incredible step of faith, it seems to me. And the purpose of your capital campaign then is going to be to do some debt reduction. Is that it?
Practically speaking, that is it, yes. But our name of our campaign is Preserving the Past and Securing the Future. So we want our parishioners to know that some of these things we have to do to preserve our church. But we're also making improvements for the future. So we feel confident, very confident, that we're going to be able to do this. Our parish in the past has shown an ability, a willingness to step up to the plate in previous campaigns that have all been successful. We're in strange times right now. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but we're going full speed ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And just to give a kind of a window into where we are with Christ Church Cranbrook, I like Russ, I enjoy raising money. I think it's incredibly important. I think that churches are engines of generosity. And I think sociologically and theologically, when people are educated in the church, in philanthropy, the world is a better place. So I am completely shameless about asking anybody for money. I think we do a better job with the money we raise than any social service agency out there. So I'm completely unashamed about that. I also think Russ is 100% right when he talks about it being based in relationship. And this, of course, was something that Curtis mentioned, and Jim and Lee, of course. So relationship is key. I came to be the rector of Christ Church Cranbrook after a career as a university professor and as a dean of a seminary in Canada. And because of that, I had a kind of set of rules that I tended to follow in terms of how you operate. And one is when it comes to institutional renewal, there are 3 steps you have to do. You have to have a strategic plan, then you have to have a space study, then you have to have a capital campaign. Those 3 things have to go in a deliberate order. If you try to rush it, if you get motivated by other things, my experience is you tend to shortchange what you can do. So when we got to Christ Church Cranbrook, the attendance began to go up, the ministry began to go up. We had some focused capital campaigns. The presiding bishop came to preach, and that happened during the Flint water crisis. And so we had a special fundraising effort so that we would actually provide about $30,000 to one of our parishes in Flint, St. Paul's. We then began to evolve and to address some other things that were just needed to be done, like air conditioning in the church, which was so important because the demographics of the church were such that we were doing a lot of funerals in the summer. And from there, we developed our capital campaign, our strategic plan, which is that we would be a place where people meet Jesus, find joy, share beauty, and serve others. And that our goal was to create a campus that could somehow help every person and every group that did anything to experience those 4 activities at once. So if you're singing in a choir, yes, you are sharing beauty, but you're also meeting Jesus and you're also serving others. And my hope is that you're finding joy. Just to give an example, if you're working in a soup kitchen, you're meeting Jesus as well. If you're in a Bible study, all of those things held together. And that was part of our strategic plan, which went into our case statement, which is that we needed more multi-purpose space. We needed to provide places for people to interact with each other and to have space that could be worship one day and a banquet hall the next day, and which we just didn't have in a historic, beautiful old church. And so we set about doing a feasibility study. What I experienced is there's a couple of things operating in Detroit. There's a lot of spatial racism. There's a lot of distance between the suburbs and the cities. But at the same time, there are histories of engagement, of collaboration, and philanthropy. And so being able to kind of understand that very sophisticated philanthropic environment was key. And also, finally, there was trauma. There was trauma in the form of people who were doing things for years, which they did well, like manufacturing, that they can't do the same to the same extent again in the future. So dealing with all that was something that we had to break through with a lot of communication, with a lot of relationship building, with a lot of focusing of our energies on what is the mission of our church. And so we set about, our feasibility study was a little pessimistic, frankly. It said we could raise $8 million. We ended up raising about $11 million. Partly for me, again, finally, the thing that was key is you have to be able to lead authentically and by example. If you're not tithing, don't expect anybody else to give you a large donation. If you're not giving a major gift, a self-sacrificial gift, it's really impossible for you to go to anybody else and ask them to give powerfully and support your project fully in the same way that you're hoping that they might. So all of these things for me were just these rules. The past year has been easily the most stressful year of ordained ministry for me. And I suspect it is the same for everybody else. We've had to pivot a million times. I'm suddenly running a morning TV show instead of worship service. It's stressful and difficult, but we have kept keeping on, in part because the momentum had been built up, and in part because the capital campaign that we had somehow made it possible for us to continue to be generous. So this past year, we've been able to give about $400,000 to people directly affected by COVID-19 in both Pontiac and in Detroit. And that means supplying things like extra personal protection equipment to people who are working with Forgotten Harvest, or helping organizations that have a kind of homeless shelter that works 24/7, be able to help people shelter in place for days and months. So those are the things that we've been able to do because of it. And is it stressful? Sure. It's completely stressful now. And are there disruptions? Sure. There are disruptions all the time. We just got closed down again after being open for a bit. And I guess the thing what I am so grateful for with the capital campaign that we did is it taught the congregation that we can do difficult things together. And that was a complete blessing. And then hearing people talk about money, whether or not we are comfortable with it or not, you're talking about things that matter deeply to people. And so the conversations that I had with people while we did that capital campaign were holy conversations and really important conversations, because you're talking about their hopes and dreams and fears all at once. And it's really important. So that's my take on what we did. And we're about to put the shovel in the dirt in February getting through all the permitting, everything like that. It's been an ordeal, but it's been fun. So without having done that data dump, as they say, I will. You've heard from the different parishes and the different pastors. Why don't we turn to Laura, who's with CCS in Dallas, to have her offer some perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the points that you made in your comments there, Father Bill, just really important. And we've talked about the importance of relationships. And it's important that we elevate our parishioners' relationship with Jesus in these conversations, right? Because generosity really is a reflection of spiritual health. I have found that in campaign time and time again. And so it's wonderful to see a theme, a through line from each of these conversations, which is taking care and being pastoral. And as you are thinking about what is the right step in terms of continuing on with your campaign, pausing your campaign, bringing it back, to really spend some time in prayerful reflection. I was working with a parish in advance of COVID. We had just started the campaign. And there was, of course, when the pandemic started, a point of reflection. Is this the right time for our parish to move forward? Ultimately, they decided that it wasn't. But they made that decision out of concern for the spiritual health of their community, and really used the momentum that had been built up around the campaign to that point to make the switch over to communication. And I really, noticed that as everyone was speaking, that's a common theme. We have had parishes that have continued on in their fundraising during this time. And it's important to note that for those that they have found success. I know it seems really odd for all of us to contemplate gathering with our fellow parishioners across a platform such as this one, Zoom, and putting a gift request in front of them. But indeed, that has been happening during the pandemic. And for those that have proceeded on and have done so in a careful and prayerful way, success has been found. We have seen 6-figure gift requests done over Zoom successfully. We have seen 7-figure gift requests done over Zoom successfully, but all in the spirit of advancing the mission of the church. And so I think when that is foremost, when people understand that this is a kinship with their parish, and that this is a way that they can live out their personal faith and testimony, then there is the kind of screen that's put between us here in technology tends to fade away, and people are being responsive and generous. In fact, if you look at the data on giving during the pandemic, there was quite a sharp dip at the front end of it. But now we are seeing that comparing year over year philanthropy from last year to this year, there's actually a 7% gain. And it's driven primarily by people who are giving $250 or less. So folks are really just looking and saying, what can I still give? And it's really just quite awe-inspiring.
That's beautifully said. And I want to say that CCS has been so great in sharing the analysis that it's doing on the philanthropic environment, which is done regularly. So I really appreciate that. Although, just in all honesty, I've never completed the survey myself. So I'm just being very selfish and taking from you, but you got to have your outlets. Let's turn to Maurice.
People are feeling optimistic again these days, so it's good to see.
Let's turn to Maurice.
It's good to be with all of you. Thank you for the privilege of having this conversation. I'm actually the consultant who's working with St. Paul's in Fairfield, Connecticut. And I think they're doing a great job at the relationship side of building on a wonderful parish with a diversity of ages, young families, older folks, and just showing that the church does care about people, both people within the parish and in the wider community. And that is part of why this campaign at St. Paul's is gaining traction, because people understand that fundraising is ministry. It's a way of people being able to make a difference, and philanthropy is about making a difference. And I think that that is the role of you as pastors and clergy, and it is the role of those of you who are lay leaders in your congregations. I myself, in addition to being owner and principal of Summit Fundraising, I am also senior warden at my own parish in New York City. And I know what it's like to try and make budget in your annual fund campaigns and through Pledge and Plate. And I know what it's like to try and encourage philanthropy through capital campaign giving as well. And the ask has to be compelling, as Bill was saying. We have to help people understand the need will make a difference today, and it will make a difference for the future generations to come. And so we have that stewardship responsibility of shepherding and stewarding the time, talent, and treasure that has been entrusted to us in our parishes and in our wider community. And I think when COVID hit the scene, there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty, and every situation is unique. Every situation, leadership had to evaluate their situation and make a determination on what is the best course of action. Parishes have lost certain income streams, particularly rental income, where tenants are, organizations are battling to survive, and where usage of space is not happening. Weddings are fewer, and some are forced to be outside, and so spaces are not bringing in the kinds of income that we're used to. And I think that in a capital campaign, there is an opportunity to look beyond some of that uncertainty and look with a purpose to something that people can believe in, and a vision for a congregation that people can embrace and support. So I think after an initial shock of trying to understand what this pandemic means for each of us, there's now a search for purpose, a search for meaning, a search for trying to understand how we can make a difference when we know people out there are hurting. And I think there are certain industries and certain situations where we've been blessed with having had less severe impact on our congregation. You know, churches tend to skew older in average age. And I think that by and large, we've been very good about observing the kinds of protocols that we need to observe during a pandemic, where congregations have not, for the most part, been decimated because of the pandemic. And now I think people are ready to start planning. So I think it's important to spend time on preparing for your next step if you're not already in a campaign, and if you did push the pause button, to carefully evaluate what you need to do to get back on track. And one of the things we did at St. Paul's was as Curtis was saying, we evaluated every single household situation, and where there was a pastoral need that was taken care of and is being taken care of, and where we needed to reassess how much we could approach someone for in terms of a capital campaign ask, we made those adjustments, and we made it easier for people to commit to both an annual fund gift and a capital campaign fund gift, largely because of individual conversations, many of them through Zoom, a few of them outdoors, and a few of them just over the phone. But certainly checking in frequently with people tells people that their relationship with your congregation matters. And if we can help people to feel that they're cared for, they will help to care for our parishes in return and build a future that includes a capital campaign contribution.
I want to pick up on that, Maurice, because I think it's so key, because one of the things that we did do is we were kind of in the cleanup phase of our annual stewardship drive in early March, which is not unusual for us. Sometimes it takes a little while to get to where we need to be. And we immediately shifted our focus when the pandemic hit, particularly with Detroit, with the high rate of infection and the racial disparities that were being and the inequities that were being evidenced by the pandemic. We knew we had to immediately engage, and it was so critical for us to maintain our moral center as we went through this pandemic. And I believe that actually is going to pay dividends in capital campaigns in the future. And I also think it convinced people. We did the same kind of parish-wide survey, and we did all that. We pivoted entirely online with our educational programs, and we provided opportunities for service, and we tried to engage, and that was the only way to handle this, it seems. So I really think that's beautiful. Both Laura and Maurice are raising questions that are looming in different ways. Laura is raising the question about how to continue to do a capital campaign over Zoom, and can it be done? And at least from my perspective, this was not a funeral that I managed, but it was a funeral I was asked to speak at. But I did a funeral for about 200 people over Zoom, the entire funeral. And I found it to be, everybody found it to be incredibly profound. And Nikki Gumbel, I read recently, said that Alpha is even better over Zoom. Now, he's a salesman, but yes, I think there's something to that might be right. And then what you said, Maurice, that a lot of the ways in which we fundamentally think about the economics of parishes that survive by renting spaces out, that has been disrupted, and that is a challenge for many, and the income streams, those are significant. Yeah. We've invited questions from the panelists, from the audience. So folks, please feel free to enter those in the chat, if you will, and we will look at them. Before that, I want to open up and ask, in each of your contexts, what has the pandemic been for you? And to flesh out that question just a bit, I began to hold webinars on the pandemic that were surprisingly interesting to people, and we had a lot of attendees. And one we did was on the economic forecast for Detroit, because that's one of the great triggers and concerns for people in Detroit. So I had the head of a sausage company, who is this incredible woman, and I had the head of one of the suppliers, a manufacturer who makes parts for the big three and others. And then I had the head of a movie theater chain come on and speak. And then I had a community banker. So to my surprise, the purchase of preserved meats went up 40% during the pandemic. So she was having the year of her life. It was the 100th year anniversary of the company. They were just going, they didn't have any slowdown. They had some concerns about the meat they were getting, but they had sorted that out in their supply chain. And then the manufacturer was doing great. He was expecting to expand his business. The movie theater, not so much. And he has struggled tremendously and experienced incredible challenges to his economic fortunes as a person and as a business. And then the banker had just gone through the PPP, and so felt like they had been finally given the ability to give money away. And he was so kind of the charge of that. What, in terms of your different places, how has the economic impact in your context affected your capital campaigns?
Bill, this is Lee. We just finished our annual campaign and have raised more money this year than we did last year. And I think that's pretty fantastic in view of the circumstances that are there. And I believe one of the important ways we've done that is keeping communications up with our residents, our parishioners. We can't necessarily see them all in person. We're doing virtual services and very small in-person services, but we can at least call them and see how they're doing. And what our rector has done a wonderful job with is making sure everybody knows how this construction is going on. And by showing pictures, and they're neat, exciting pictures that show the improvement and how great our church building is going to be, which is so important to our parishioners. We're in love with this 125-year-old building that we've been in. So, but I say that we've been successful in the annual campaign, even though we are from a state that I mentioned earlier has been pretty crushed by the energy.
Yeah, that and Lee, I have to say, you're the master of understatement when you said we had a couple of small hurricanes. Like that just terrifies me when you say that.
Well, we also had a flood in 2016. Russ knows what I'm talking about. That flooded 80,000 homes and businesses in Baton Rouge.
Amazing.
2016, and we still are coming through these campaigns well. And I think my philosophy about giving to the church, and I've run many of these campaigns since the 60s, is don't give until it hurts, give until it feels good.
Ha, beautifully said.
And that is something that I believe in. And we have generous people in our parish, and we are taking a risk with this loan, but God will see us through that.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Lee. Maurice.
So just to follow on to what Lee was saying, construction is something that you can actually benefit from doing during COVID because your buildings are not being used as much as they were before COVID. So if there's an opportunity to negotiate a cheaper cost in construction during COVID, that certainly would be to your advantage. And you're showing people that the church is preparing for the day when we have a vaccine, and that you'll be open for business on day one. If you're able to arrange bridging finance and do certain projects that are being funded through a capital campaign, or perhaps you've taken advantage of good weather to complete projects that can otherwise not be completed during the winter months, those are all positive, forward-looking approaches to showing people that the church is not closed in the sense of it's not there for people. It should be there for people, and you should be demonstrating that in as many ways as you can, pastorally and otherwise. There was a question from Roger Kilgore I saw in the chat asking about how to engage people that are hunkered down. Well, I think you want to show them the pastoral concern that others have spoken about on this webinar, but you also want to make it easy for them to give, to make donations, whether it's to your annual fund, a one-off donation from someone on Zoom who's attending a service from far away, who's perhaps related to someone in your congregation. You want to make it easy for them to make capital campaign pledges and donations if you're in a capital campaign. One of the obstacles to not seeing people in person is you shouldn't only have a hard copy pledge card as the way of somebody making a capital campaign pledge, or for that matter, your annual pledge. So enhancements of technology such as Zoom and online giving platforms is something that every congregation should take seriously. And one of the best witnesses to me in a campaign that I was consulting on was an older gentleman who told me that the reason he was putting his parish in his estate plans and making a planned gift to his congregation was because his mother took him to serve soup and bread at a soup kitchen during the Great Depression. And that impression was stuck with him throughout his years, and he believed till the day of his death and his $1 million gift to his parish in his estate, that the church is a force for good in society, and the church is a place that can make a difference, and perhaps even more so in challenging times like a pandemic or a recession, which is when I started my fundraising career just before the 2007-2008 recession.
Well, Maurice, that is so beautiful what you just said, and just to pick up on you're surfacing this question that's come from Roger Kilgore. Thank you for that question. Let's keep them both open as we go forward and just see where things go. Jim, you want to jump in?
Yeah, accountability still matters a lot, pandemic or not pandemic, people want to know. I think one of the things that's happened with philanthropy, whether they give to churches or not, is that, it's almost looked at as an investment as much as a charitable contribution. And people want to know what their money is going toward and be accountable to the projects that you've identified as priorities. So I think that's something we all have to keep in mind. Laura mentioned something earlier about making asks over Zoom. And it's actually, in my experience, my recent experience, obviously, that it's easier to get meetings with people in a certain sense through Zoom because it's less time out of their day to go somewhere and meet with you and then get back to their office or whatever. And I totally agree with Laura in the sense that you can be very successful. We've been very successful in asking for money via Zoom, and it does not take the place of personal visits, obviously, but it's the next best thing. And I'm just wondering, I think about this as post-pandemic, is this going to be a new way of doing business in terms of reaching out to people in a more convenient way, in a personal way? So just a couple of thoughts there.
I think that's beautifully put. Jim, we've got one more question that we're going to bring up, and this is a wonderful question. It's from Matt Bradley, who writes as the Dean of Christ Church Cathedral in Louisville. He says the cathedral has a bicentennial in 2022. The congregation had hoped to do a campaign in conjunction with the bicentennial, but the pandemic has caused us to re-examine these plans. In addition to the economic conditions and communication challenges, I'm concerned that I don't have the long-term relationship with members of the congregation to draw upon. Any advice on if there is a way to move forward, or should we pump the brakes until we can get back together in person? And we're going to begin with Russ.
I'll raise my hand because I'm going to dip out in a little bit for my next Zoom. So that's one thing that's changed. I can tell you I'm wearing jeans and I don't get to do that in my office. So every situation is different, and I'm sure Maurice and Laura would say the same thing. Every situation is different. But I'll go back to, we were talking a moment ago about the scale of, for instance, St. Martin's or Curtis's church, and it doesn't matter. The scale doesn't matter. I've done campaigns in a few churches. I was the rector of the church where I, turned off the lights and watched the silver, and I've done that too. And it's the same formula everywhere. And I'll go back to something Laura said: connecting people with our Lord in a real, meaningful way, and also that personal relationship with them. So one of the things that we did during the pandemic was call every household. So at St. Martin's with 9,500, that's 3,500 households. And we've done that 2 times now, and we engage vestry and others, and we're about to do it a 3rd time for Advent. So that part is crucial. And I do think there's an important piece of having theological education behind giving. We're not just giving to be the church that did XYZ project, or to, why are we doing this? We're investing in the kingdom of God. And so when that moment comes, and to address Matt's question, which I think is important, to have that relationship, but have you made the theological case for it? And so with the scale of this last campaign, and it is my last, I will say, but there may be another one, but it ain't going to be me. And so I'm going to stay here till I retire or expire, I hope. But as we did something that I don't know if Laura and Maurice have ever seen this. We knew we were asking people for big gifts, whether your income was $30,000 a year or $100,000 a year. And we suggested to people that they look at their savings and tithe from their savings. So that they had never looked at that before. They always look at, how can I pay my pledge this year? For those who are tithers, or they give out of their regular income. And we had a lot of response to that. And all of a sudden people who were saying, well, I just couldn't see how I could do something. And then they looked and they said, well, what's 10% of your of your life savings that you're giving to your church. And a lot of people responded well to that. I will say, as some of you have already said, during the pandemic, we have church members from all over. We've got 2 families in North Carolina, one of which called for a pledge card the other day. I said, I'll personally deliver that. But we've got a family in Tennessee. We've got another one who's dialing in from the Northeast, and those people have started actually supporting us because we've become their church during the pandemic. So it's been a fascinating journey, a tough journey, and I think, like all of you here, I'm much more optimistic about next year, even if it's next summer. But you can sense, as Lee was pointing out, with variations of good news, you can sense a growing optimism about what's next, and I'm optimistic. But my main point is that relationship. So Matt, whether or not you're there for a year or two, I mean, I guess I would lean toward making sure those are deep, fast relationships, because everybody has to have a sense of buy-in.
I think that there's so much wisdom in what you just shared, Russ, and thank you so much for that distinction between giving to a capital campaign out of savings and giving to your annual pledge drive from your budget, your income. So I really appreciate that distinction. It's a key one, and it's one that often gets kind of moved past. Before I get to you, Maurice, I wanted to say one thing to Matt. I do take a slightly different view. I would suggest that you explore a strategic plan that will pivot on the bicentennial. And I think that would be where you're going to have to do listening, and that's where you're going to have to do learning, and that's where you're going to have to do some committee work. And I would also do it in old-fashioned way. You can do this over Zoom, but I would gather up different stakeholders in committee meetings and have the Zoom conversations and start them now. Because when you have that, once you have that strategic plan put together, you will be able to move into a capital campaign much quicker. Not because there's anything magical about a strategic plan, but because when you do a strategic plan well, you surface and understand the dynamics and relationships that you're in as the pastor, and you'll be taken in to again the hopes, dreams, and fears that people will have. So you can get to work on that now. And I never believe we should never pump the brakes. That's me. But I tend to be. I don't have a very good sense of risk assessment. Then going. Sorry, there's been a change. Is that Maurice? That you wanted to jump in? Yes.
Well, actually, you've said most of what I was going to say, Bill. Just to echo the point, during COVID, perhaps there's an opportunity where people have a little more time. They're not commuting to work. Their schedules are a little bit more flexible, and engaging in some kind of strategic listening process where you can get to know your parishioners and where you can think through the elements of a strategic plan. Identifying core values, for instance, trying to integrate these new social movements and changes that we're seeing emerging in our society, through that, developing a consensus, or I heard the phrase buy-in, which I think is really important, to a process which could lead to a capital campaign. It doesn't necessarily have to always lead to a capital campaign. As a fundraiser, I think there's always an opportunity to be planning for a capital campaign. So during this lull in our corporate ability to meet, where we can't actually gather together and do things physically, we can actually engage in a planning process towards a capital campaign. And the other element that I wanted to throw into the mix is, over the last 3 or 4 years, the stock market has done incredibly well. And I think there's an emerging trend that we would all perhaps have evidence for, that a large number of capital campaign gifts are given through appreciated securities. And so emphasizing that as a source of how someone can fund a gift to a capital campaign, I think is key. Thanks.
I'd love to, thank you so much, Maurice. I would love to continue this conversation. Unfortunately, we do have to pull this to a close. And I'm going to finish with a prayer for the church's mission from the BCP, pages 816 to 817, for those of you who have it memorized. So without further ado, the Lord be with you.
So with you.
Let us pray. Ever-living God, whose will it is that all should come to know you through your Son, Jesus Christ, inspire our witness to him, that we may know the power of his forgiveness and the hope of his resurrection, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, everybody. Joe has a wonderful message to you all by the chat, and hope you will access the materials and share them broadly. And we hope that you have a wonderful holiday and a peaceful start to Advent.